Right, let's turn our attention now to, well, something that has been really useful for keeping a lot of businesses afloat who were hit by lockdown, as indeed our last guest hotel was, and that's those bounce back loans. They were meant to help those who were just forced to close down. Business just dried up overnight, even if you weren't forced to close down in some cases. They were able to apply for those bounce back loans. Well, a new report from the National Audit Office has found that £28 billion was handed out by the government in those bounce back loans, well, guaranteed by them, the banks actually handing them out, before there was even any kind of check on whether or not those were actually viable businesses and whether or not they passed the most fundamental basic fraud checks. Well, let's talk about this with Mike Craig. He's aka Mr. Bounceback, founder of MrBounceback.com, a website dedicated to discussing those loans. Good morning to you, Mike.
Morning, Julia. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. I think, an awful lot of people will have felt the same way as I did when Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, at one of those press conferences, announced the help that was going to be given out, the furlough schemes, the bounce back loans, and they were absolutely vital. I know so many people whose businesses just would not have survived without them. And yet the real concern here is that the money, huge sums of taxpayers' money, it's going to have to be paid back eventually, were handed out without even the most cursory checks being made on whether or not there was a fraudulent claim or not.
Yeah, well, that was a point that's been made by many an MP and many of members of the House of Lords. We're at the stage now, though, where the fraud rates are actually a lot less than what they thought they were. And a lot of people are actually struggling to pay them back, especially with recent events. Yeah, that's where my worries are at the minute. But like you say, I've been reading all night. If I look a bit rough, it's due to me being up all night.
Everyone's got an excuse.
Pages. Well, it's a part horror story and part fairy tale story because they've set up a police department, the National Investigation Service. Now, they're going to handle any fraudulent cases. But they've announced they can only handle 50 cases per year. And at the minute, they've got 2,100 cases on file. So that's going to be 42 years before they can work their way through all them. That's scandalous. And what they're hoping, over 3 years, they're going to recover. They've got a target of £6 million to recover over 3 years, which is the exact same amount it costs to run their operation.
So what's the point? Other than the fact that people need to know this. I've said this many times on the show. I always wanted, when they announced it, to say this is going to be there to help people. We're going to get that money out to you as quick as possible, and that means there will not be as many of the long-winded checks that will often take place. If anyone, we will investigate until the end of time. If anyone is found to have done this fraudulently, you'll face 10 years in jail. Forget paying the money back. It won't just be that. You'll face 10 years in jail. We will build prisons, especially for that. For people taking advantage of this. Now, a lot of this might not even be fraud, but there were companies that were literally set up to take these bounce back loans. I know people who, they're not friends of mine. I know they wouldn't be friends with people like this, who didn't need any help at all, but took the bounce back loans because interest free, and then invested that money, took the advantage. That all those loans, of course, guaranteed by the government. They're paying their loans back, of course, so we don't lose out on that front. But people taking advantage. I actually had people say to me, with my sort of, I run everyone has you have a company when you do this sort of job when you're freelance. Why haven't you taken a loan? Well, because I wasn't affected. I was lucky enough to still be working every day. Oh no, but you can still apply. It's like, but I wouldn't do that. That would be immoral. Even if it's not illegal, it would be immoral. And it's amazing how many people just thought there's some free money to be had, free for a year. I'll take it.
Yeah, well, the insolvency service have actually been looking into that, and I list everything on the website. Currently, they've done 155 people for fraud. They're all listed on the website. People going out buying Rolex watches and cars and all that lot. Well, the problem you've just stated there is some MPs, for example, Marion Fellows, an SNP MP, she asked Paul Scully recently, could they be turned into grants? And that was one of he said no, because some SMEs have actually squirreled the money away, and that would be unfair. But in my experience, talking to tens of thousands, and I have spoken to tens of thousands of people with bounce back loans. Well, I ran a poll recently. I asked 560 people who have got a bounce back loan, how much have they got left? And over 80% have got nothing left. Because the pandemic is just never ending. So
well, that was it. These loans, the idea was, it was tied you over for a few months, and then it ended up being 20. Some businesses were closed down from almost all that time. When they were open, even August 2020, Eat Out to help out the hospitality, they weren't even making ends meet. They would not forget a profit. And now we're seeing, all the furloughs ended. the loans have to be paid back. The banks were quite happy to hand the money out because it's all guaranteed by the government. It was literally a risk-free debt for them, for which they'd make money.
Well, I'll tell you what, the government offered. I saw Rishi on the television. He was probably on your show or on your radio station. He offered what they call the pay-as-you-grow options because the pandemic's on for a lot longer.
Yeah.
And people had the options of extending the loan for 10 years. They could take a 6-month repayment holiday, which, by the way, ends in the next few days for those who took the loan. Yeah. And then you can take 3 to 6 months interest-only options. However, on the back of a cigarette packet, I worked out earlier, the extra interest for small businesses is 420 million, as it stands with the number of companies who took it, the pay-as-you-grow options. That number is going to increase. But the only people profiting out of this or making any money is the banks. The SMEs are just, well, it's horrendous, especially now. Because it's like everything, it's like history repeating itself.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people took it out because they had no other forms of support.
Yeah.
It's
So we've got
crazy.
a problem with fraud at one end, people taking the mick and using it and exploiting it, and then we've got the other end. We've got the people who really needed it, who are really desperate, can't afford to pay them back, facing all that interest. Businesses still struggling, and again, a lot of those businesses, hospitality, travel, being hit once again by the latest rules and the latest scares. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike Craig. He's founder of MrBounceback.com, a website dedicated to dealing with this issue. Thank you for joining us. 9:46.